Welcome to the conversation. This next interview is going to have a twist because at the end, I want to talk about how Ryan has made the best argument against gun control that I have seen. I'm very much in favor of gun control, but there was an argument against it that is fascinating and involves the Klan. Okay, but first we're going to talk politics. The man I'm referring to is Ryan Grim. He's the Washington bureau chief for the Intercept, also a TYT contributor. Ryan, welcome back.
Good to be here.
All right. So first, let's start generally about politics, and then we'll work our way through all the things that are happening, including the story I just referred to. So I'm asking this of everyone just to see if anyone knows. Do the Democrats have a plan to do anything for the next 3 years?
Define anything.
No, like, okay, so obviously they're gonna pass budgets, right? Because they are forced to pass budgets. They're gonna pass defense spending bills that are going to be engorged and no one's going to care, and it's gonna cost more than anything that was proposed in Build Back Better or anything else. And then they'll add 24 billion on top and pass it. So that's regular course of business. But in terms of major legislation, it appears that they have completely surrendered and have pivoted to let's market the crap we already passed. So I'm trying to see, maybe I'm getting it wrong and I don't want to get it wrong. Maybe they have major legislation coming down the pike and they have a secret genius plan to pass it. So that's why I ask.
I mean, the best that you're going to be able to hope for is I mean, we'll see what happens with the pieces of Build Back Better over the next month or two. If first of all, Ben Ray Lujan has taken them down. He's a senator from New Mexico, has taken them from 50 to 49 votes on the floor. So they don't have 50 votes until Lujan, who had a stroke, comes back to the Senate, and that could be another 4 weeks, maybe slightly more. And so for the foreseeable future, they're just doing things that Republicans will allow them to do, and they still have an enormous number of people to confirm. Like the system is, this is a separate point, but the system is completely insane and broken. And this is whether you're Republican or Democrat. Like the idea that the Senate should be taking up a day or two now in 2022, when the election was in 2020, to confirm the deputy assistant secretary for the Army is insane. Like our Army, just go ahead and hire who you want to be your deputy assistant secretary. Like this is absurd. Like Sam Begenstos was nominated to be the general counsel for Health and Human Services. Insanely important position because that oversees like refugees and everything else that Health and Human Services oversees, immigration, like all of this. He's just now getting out of committee. So he's not even confirmed yet. He's not even in the job. Like Democrats are going to be out of control of the Senate without having actually staffed up their administration. When things are moving as fast as they are in this world, to have it take 2 years to staff up an administration is just, you can't run a country like that. Separately from that, Lena Khan over at the FTC and Rohit Chopra over at the CFPB are probably going to be the most exciting things that the White House does, over the next several years. From what Joe Manchin says, he still supports a lot of, hundreds of millions of dollars in clean energy investments. He supports an increase in corporate tax rate and carried interest rate. He supports like major chunks of the Build Back Better Act. Right now, it's all it's personality driven at this point. Like they hate each other. Like Ron Klain and Joe Manchin weren't talking to each other for weeks on end. And so it's possible that when things calm down, Manchin's like, okay, here are the pieces of Build Back Better that I'm okay with. And to me, getting the 700 million, whatever it was, in clean energy investments through is probably the most important thing Democrats can, I think it's the most important thing Democrats can do, because they're about to be out of power, perhaps until you and I are retired and off playing, a golf on Mars at Elon Musk's, little country club that he built on Mars. But that's because this is their last shot. And if they can do a significant clean energy investment, then the White House, then Democrats, if they, let's say they maintain control of the White House in 24, which they certainly might not, then they have then policy and money that they can work with. So, Republicans will be in control of the House, maybe the Senate, impeaching whoever the president is, every other week, investigating, and Hunter Biden, whatever else they can find. But it would allow them to have something to do some actual governing with. And once corporate America sees, okay, they're serious, everybody's serious, we're moving away from fossil fuels, I think it actually could happen really fast.
Yeah.
Because no companies don't want to be the last one holding the bag. So I think they're all kind of ready to move, but they're just waiting for everybody else to move. They're happy to do fossil fuels until civilization is extinguished. Yeah. But they also don't want to be the last one to switch to clean energy if they think that's going to happen. So that's about what I can see.
So Ryan, we don't often disagree. It almost never happens. But I don't believe that it's personal. I think that's a ridiculous cover story. And if it is personal, what a bunch of children. How
they are children.
Deeply irresponsible, petulant children. And how the press should be enraged. So Joe Manchin is going to deny saving the planet because his feelings were hurt?
Feelings were hurt.
Yeah, okay. But it's so I believe it to some degree because there's such egomaniacs. There's such selfish jerks. Yeah, okay. That
well,
part.
You're right. They're looking for an excuse as well.
Exactly. Of course, it's an excuse. The reality is the donors. That's the only thing anyone cares about. Which ironically leads to agreeing with you on the overall point that nothing that helps the voters, like the lowering drug prices, has always been a hilarious joke. They were never, ever going to do that. The Democratic Party is completely corrupt on that. They would never do it. The Republicans are worse. They have bipartisan agreement to pleasure drug company donors till the end of time, okay? So anyone, it drives me nuts when reporters say, oh, that one's got a real chance. Oh, Manchin's in favor of it or Sinema's in favor of it. No, they're not, they're lying. They're all obviously lying. So now it might come as a little bit ironic for me to agree with you on clean energy, especially because Manchin is a coal baron, right? But the way that it passes, so all of the other things that child tax credit, pay family, nothing's gonna pass, nothing, okay? But the reason why clean energy has a shot is twofold, I think, and I wanna run this by you. Mm-hmm. One is they can sneak in non-clean energy funding, right? And as long as Manchin gets his piece of the pie, he'll be like, oh, you wanna do solar and wind? As long as you're giving me money for coal so I can get a couple more $1 million in my pocket, what do I care, right? And so that's possible. And the second reason, Ryan, is because tons of rich Democratic donors that have nothing to do with the energy industry also have collectively realized in the last couple of years that they too live on this planet. So among the rich donors that I have heard about in political circles, the only issue they care about is climate change.
Yep. Yes. So that's key. And then there's like a 2A or a 0.3 to that, which is that the clean energy industry is now an industry.
Bingo. Yep. So they now have money.
They have lobbyists.
They're now donating. They've got lobbyists.
And so you can counterbalance. Obviously, fossil fuels are the dominant power, but you can counterbalance it. So if you're a politician in the 1980s that wanted to get behind wind or solar, like you might have been able to get a few $1,000s here or there up against all of the weight of the fossil fuel industry. If you're a politician now that's waging a war against the fossil fuel industry, you have the entire weight of this massive clean energy industry behind you, throwing down all sorts of political contributions, lobbying, which the left needs to start looking at very closely, because there's going to be all sorts of cronyism and corruption caught up in that, just like there is any industry. But yes, you're right that a ton of these like particularly West Coast, but also New York liberals, New England liberals, who super rich people who, because we have this lottery system of an economy that, wealth trickles down through generations, obviously. So you've got generational wealth, but then you also have this lottery system where just randomly, people in Silicon Valley are popping up and becoming, 100 millionaires or billionaires. 1 out of 100 of those are going to have some sense that they want to, save the planet. And because there's this asymmetry where money in the public sector goes a lot farther, a congressional campaign, costs several $1 million, but the value of owning a congressional seat is in the billions. So it's this weird kind of asymmetry there, this arbitrage that still exists, that you have. That if you can get 1 out of 100 of those billionaires who care about climate change, they'll throw in a lot of money. And so so you balance out the money piece. And your first point is also absolutely correct. Joe Manchin, his condition for this happening was the funding here, cannot actively disadvantage coal, because that originally and what he means by disadvantage is disadvantaged relative to the current situation, which is currently subsidizing coal and giving them an advantage. So he wants them to continue to have an advantage. The good news is that coal is already losing badly, because coal is on the way out. It just economically, getting a bunch of equipment out into a mountain and digging into the mountain and shipping it over to a plant and burning it is just no longer competitive against just throwing up some windmills or throwing up some solar panels. And so the clean energy people are like, you know what, fine. Even playing field is fine. Give us 700 million and let everybody compete for it. And so they have caved on all of the different things that they were going to do to try to forcibly wind down coal. And instead, so his company that he owns in West Virginia and other coal companies, can basically the point is like anybody who owns some crap now can continue to dig it and continue to burn it. And they'll be rich and their grandchildren will be rich the rest of their lives. And the deal would be, well, we're also going to then fund solar and wind. Scientists say that that's absolutely the wrong way to go. You're not moving fast enough. But that's where we are. And you're right. Like that's the compromise, quote unquote. We love to compromise with science and with the climate, but that's the compromise that means that that's why it could possibly happen.
Okay, now let's talk about how full of crap Democrats are on everything else. So voting rights was supposed to be the bare minimum. And if you got one rung above that, it was $15 minimum wage. These were all supposed to be layups, no question about it. On $15 minimum wage, I said, nonsense. They're not going to do that. It's not a layup. All the donors are against higher wages. And unfortunately, I was proven right. I thought voting rights was a layup because that actually affects their own personal interest in their own race, right? And so, but there's some chance that they've gerrymandered the blue states so effectively, they think, well, maybe we don't want to get rid of gerrymandering. Maybe this is better for not all Democrats and certainly not for Democratic voters, but for Democratic incumbents who currently have those
Democratic
seats.
Incumbents.
Yep.
Right.
And so, Ryan, is it fair to say they were lying all along? I don't mean every Democrat, certainly AOC, the squad, Just Democrats, most of them stuck with their word, right? And they were telling the truth and they don't take corporate PAC money, right? But when it comes to Democratic leadership, Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, I've always maintained that they're liars and they never meant any of it. Have I not been proven right by their track record?
At best, it was wishful thinking, because they were always going to have to do something about the filibuster, and they just never, and in order to do something about the so they were talking a huge game about getting rid of the filibuster and doing voting rights in October of 2020, when they thought that they had a good chance of getting 53, 54 Senate seats. Because if you remember, that philandering dude in North Carolina was way up. They thought Susan Collins was a goner. They thought they had a shot in Iowa. They had Bullock running in Montana that they thought that they had a credible chance of winning that one. And I might be missing one or another. So if they'd have hit those, and those were liberals basically. Like they were like run of the line, standard run of the mill Democrats. They were like not Joe Manchin Democrats. They were like Democrats whose name you wouldn't hear, like Tammy Duckworth. She just, you don't ever hear her name. She just votes the way that the party votes. And so they were expecting that they would have 53, 54 Democrats. So they were hoping they were. They on Maine and Iowa and North Carolina and Montana and others. And so they wound up with just 50. And so now in order to do voting rights, you have to get rid of the filibuster and you need to win over Manchin and Sinema. Things were going their direction. Like they got a lot of the holdouts, because there were a whole bunch of Democratic senators who weren't loud about it, but didn't want to change the rules, like the Pat Leahy types. And they came out publicly and like, you know what, we're for this. And so they got to the 48 quicker than they had been hoping to. And then they just hit the wall.
I don't believe it.
And at that,
I don't believe it, Ryan. I believe if they got 54 senators,
the others,
there would have been 5 holdouts or 6 holdouts.
Although a bunch of those ran on it. Like a bunch of those said,
I don't believe it.
If I get
I don't
elected,
believe it. There's no way in the world they were going to lift that filibuster unilaterally, completely, and not have an excuse for all those corporate Democrats to vote against the American people. They weren't going to vote for them. Their donors would never allow it. Why does the filibuster exist? It exists to be a shield for corporate donors. Anyone savvy in politics knows that. They're not going to get rid of that shield. And Ryan, again, I would argue that I was proven conclusively correct when they made an exception for the filibuster to raise the debt ceiling, because that would have crashed the stock market and would have cost them money.
Right. Yes,
So it's over.
Right.
It's over. There's no excuse.
But what Republicans are for, not crashing the stock market. Republicans are not for the Voting Rights Act, and so I don't. Some of this is like beside the point, because like getting into a politician's head sometimes doesn't even matter, because what matters is what they do. If you believe that, and this is why I still think that Schumer did want to do it, because he wants to stay majority leader. He wants to be down in history as a majority leader that changed the country, that did great things, that whose name goes up on elementary schools all over Brooklyn, all over New York, all over the country. He wants to be a big person who achieves things. And he thought, this was his analysis, and he was sharing it publicly and privately, that if they didn't accomplish the things that they set out to do, that they would be washed out and he'd be a one-term majority leader. And he did not want to be a one-term majority leader. And so they're now on track to fail to accomplish the things they said they would do.
No.
And he's on track to be washed out, which is there's no, you can't convince me that he wanted to be a one-term majority leader who's looked at in history as like a guy you forget about.
No,
just to make other.
Ryan, your best case scenario is they're largely liars, but they're also losers.
And egotistical.
Right. Yeah. Now, here's my counter argument to that. Ever since they started taking corporate money back in 1978, it has helped them in the short term and hurt them in the long term. And they used to have Democrats used to have overwhelming majorities in the country. They lost all those majorities because they got hooked on corporate money, but they cannot get off of it because, Ryan, the thing you're missing is they're addicts. So Chuck Schumer might want a legacy. He might want to be a majority leader for a long time, but he's hooked on the donor money. So if you said to him, okay, now give up all your drug company money and give it up for the Democratic Party, like they're not gonna take it anymore in the Senate, you're their leader. He would say, no way, take my name off the schools, I don't give a damn, I'll have a plaque at ExxonMobil, it'll be totally fine. There's no way he would get off that crack. They're all addicts.
But here's the thing about Schumer, and also the thing about any addict, they don't care where their supply comes from. If somebody gives them a bulk supply, or somebody's just throwing them, just constant little hits. Like that doesn't matter to them as long as they're getting high. And what Schumer saw in 2018 and in 2020 was these resistance Democrats pumping $25 every week into like 10 different Senate campaigns, to the point where that idiot who lost in Maine to Susan Collins lost with $14 million still in her bank account. Like they raised so much money from anti-Trump resistance Democrats that they couldn't even spend it all, because Maine only has a couple television networks, and that's where they spend all their money on television.
There's only so dumb. I can't stand how dumb they are.
They are so dumb, and they like to lose to Susan Collins and have $14 million in the bank when you're done. Also, the person they nominated, they were like, oh, she was the Speaker of the House of Maine. Well, half the state was Speaker of the House of Maine. Like they rotate in and out. Like nobody had ever heard of her. She was just a establishment candidate. That was a disastrous pick. It's completely. But the point is, he raised hundreds of millions of dollars from these resistance donors. And what he was telling these groups was like, look, they're going to stop giving to us. Like he was framing it in explicit, donor terms, like the terms you're talking about, but not Wall Street donors, but regular people. Like these people are fired up for us. They phone banked for us. They knocked on doors, and most importantly, they gave tons of money. And if we don't show that there was some point to that, they will stop giving us money.
No, they went back to their old habits. They can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. And Ryan, I could also prove that's not exactly right. So, and why they use it for now evil purpose. Okay, so first of all, I raised more money than Christy Smith. I ran in a Democratic primary against her, but they supported Christy Smith anyway. So apparently there is some money that they are opposed to. Nina Turner raised $6 million in her race. Yeah. And you know what though? Because he's anti-corruption and I'm anti-corruption, all of a sudden they didn't like that money, right? They don't like the money if it's going to hurt their egos and hurt their corruption. So that there's no question about that. That's open and shut.
Right, that's why he was so excited about the resistance Dem money, because when it was Bernie money, money to Cenk, money to Nina, like, okay, they're like, that's interesting as a model, but those aren't the politics that we really want.
Yeah, because they're corrupt. Then they don't want to do the right thing.
And then when you see tens of millions of dollars flowing to like a random Iowa DSCC candidate who's just straight out of central casting, has no interesting positions, not anti-corruption, not they're just running on the Democratic Party platform, and they're able to raise tens of millions of dollars in small dollars. Then Democrats are like, oh, okay, so we don't owe you like a political revolution, yet you're still going to give us money. But Schumer still thought we have to do something. Like we have to show that we don't need to enact a revolution, but we need to do something.
Yeah.
And right, they couldn't even do something.
No, they don't have it in them. They don't have it in them. And by the way, Ryan, it also cuts the other way. So that gets to the last point about evil. So they didn't do police reform. Now that's, of course, they were never going to do police reform. If the Republicans go boo about cops, all the Democrats will fall down. Clyburn will be all over the ground groveling to Republicans. No, I swear I'll never help black people. I swear I'll never do police reform. So that's the corporate Democrats led by Clyburn, okay? But it's not just that. They raise money promising to do police reform. If they actually do the police reform, they won't be able to raise money off of it.
Right, I mean, and Clyburn was, as you know, he was like a longtime civil rights activist, and he, like, I mean, that's what he came out of in the 1960s.
Actually, I looked into his history, Ryan. He actually isn't. He's always been a corporate goon.
Well, once he got into elected office, but I mean, like, he was an activist with SNCC, and like, he was
like when he was 13. It's been like 70 years.
Teens and early 20s, yes. Yeah, 1960s, yeah. But yeah, you're right. He saw the defund the police movement as hostile toward him and hostile toward Democrats, and went to war with it and name checked it regularly. Said, really picked that fight. And so right, and if they were never, yes, you're right. They were never going to get 60 votes. on police reform that actually reformed policing, and so the only way to do that would have also been the filibuster. And they, as we talked about, they just haven't. That didn't happen.
Yeah, but they're still raising money off of it. If a Democratic incumbent sends you an email saying they're going to do something and you should give them money, it's a guarantee. It's just as much of a lie as Donald Trump sending you an email telling you he's going to do something. Okay.
And I feel like at this point they should. Just ban no-knock warrants. You know what?
They won't even do that. They won't even do the simplest thing.
We're not going to do the whole. We're not going to be able to do the whole thing. Let's just do the simplest thing.
And you know what that would be? That would be window dressing. That would be to cover up their crime of actually not doing anything, right? Because that's so simple and doesn't solve the problem at all. But they can't bring themselves to do the bare minimum. Instead, they'll send you fake emails. We're going to do something.
Breonna Taylor killed in a no-knock raid.
Yeah.
And nothing.
Nothing. I mean, let alone Amir Locke. Which then leads me to the last thing here. We're way out of time, but I got to do this. So you wrote a story that I've been asking people to write, so thank you, about how the NRA is a bunch of liars, speaking of liars, and they're explicitly racist. So legal gun owners like Amir Locke, Philando Castile, EJ Bradford, Kenneth Walker, that's Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, all the people that you wrote about in your piece that we've talked about on TYT. Legal gun owners who happen to be black, gunned down by the cops in grossly unjust ways, and the NRA didn't say a goddamn thing about it, okay? They are the worst of the worst. They're thoroughly racist. They don't care about gun rights. They just want white people to be able to kill black people. That's the NRA. But the great irony, and what led to my tease in the beginning of the interview is, you put in something into your story, Ryan, that I did not know, and it was the best argument against gun control that I've ever heard. It's what the Klan did when they were first started. So tell us that story.
Right, and I could still be for gun control and just say that some of the people who have led the charge on gun control have been the worst people in our country. And yes, right after the Civil War, when formerly enslaved people were freed, they got the right to vote and they started acquiring land. Some of it, they got from the Union Army that was then stripped from them, but in any event, they started building, full-on communities, and they started exercising their freedom. They started exercising the vote, and there were federal troops down there that were, preventing the former Confederates from immediately slaughtering them. And what a lot of those freed slaves did is they armed themselves, and a bunch of them had served in the Union Army. So these weren't just people who had just now stumbled on a weapon. Like, they had actually been trained, they had actually fought, they knew how to use these weapons. And so they had their freedom and they were going to defend it. And the Ku Klux Klan was organized largely around the idea of disarming the black population. And essential to the black codes that the Klan pushed for were laws that made it illegal for black people to own guns. When the federal government intervened in places where they intervened, then they would rewrite the laws so that they would be quote unquote colorblind, but still clearly aimed at making sure that black people couldn't own guns. Like their easy one was if there was a white sheriff in the town, because there were black sheriffs all throughout the Reconstruction South. But if it was a white sheriff, then the community would say, sure, anybody who wants to own a gun can own a gun. All you need is a license from the sheriff. Come on downtown and get it. Just come on to this back room and we'll give it to you. And so, through those mechanisms, very similar to a poll tax or through a literacy test, where, for a white voter, the literacy test would be, can you write your name? For a black voter, it would be, can you write the Constitution, without missing a comma, start to finish. And so say, hey, these are just randomly chosen literacy tests. This is a colorblind policy, but the effect was we're going to disarm the black population. And then after they disarmed the population, that's only when they were able to then go in and violently, strip voting rights and strip property rights and otherwise, terrorize the black community and bring about Jim Crow.
Yeah. So look, I'm for gun control, lots and lots of gun control, but you have to be honest, no matter what side the facts fall on, and that is a really powerful story that cuts against gun control, because once they took the guns away from the black population, the KKK terrorized them for over 100 years. So it is what it is, and I know not a lot of other shows do it, but you have to be honest about all of the facts, whether they're convenient or inconvenient to you, and I wish the rest of the media did that. Ryan Grimm does that at the Intercept all the time. We try to do that here at TYT. So Ryan, thank you for joining us, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Cenk.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.